Welcome to another episode of Expected Buffalo, the podcast. We are brought to you by, of course, One Pie Pizza, located in 2185 Clinton Street in West Seneca, onepiepizza.com, and Hiller Comerford Injury and Disability Law, your local go-to for injury and disability law. You can find them at hillercomerford.com. It has been a little bit since we've done a live one. It's been I don't know, maybe like over a month. Life, season ending, vacations, other stuff. Sometimes when you're working late and it's 11 o'clock at night, you don't want to do a podcast that's live because no one will probably listen because everybody else, these normal people, are usually in bed at that time while the sickos like me are doing hockey stuff about the Buffalo Sabres. But that's neither here or there. A lot to go through today. This is usually our mailbag Thursday slot, but the mailbag is empty. We'll get to that at the end to refill that so we can get back to our mailbag Thursdays. But we're just going to do a normal podcast today because there are a good amount of things that I want to cover and discuss as we are nearing the end of May. And then once the calendar flips to June, we really get going. You have the Combine here in Buffalo in the first week of June, and then the Stanley Cup Final wraps up a few weeks later. And then we get into the draft, then free agency, and we are well on our way in the offseason. Where to start today? Let's start with the front office. So it is, like I said, the 22nd of May. The only front office change that we have to this point is Eric Stahl as special assistant to the general manager. The senior advisor role still looms. They're really been quiet except when Lou Lamoriello was found at the airport and it turns out he was just walking around and in Buffalo to get his Nexus renewed. And since then, there's really been nothing. It's been pretty quiet. And that could mean a few things. It could mean they're not getting anybody to bite like they hoped. It could mean that they're waiting for things to play out, maybe specifically with the New York Islanders job, is that continues to go through the daily drama of co-GMs, one guy, GM and president of hockey operations. Oh, here comes Brendan Shanahan, and it was looking like Bergevin. Maybe now it's Darsh, and around and around and around the New York Islanders go. Oh, and Lou Lamoriello is probably sticking around in some capacity there as well, it would seem. So we're probably not going to get any sort of move forward on a Sabres front office role until that itself gets worked out, and it seems like it's going to be at some point this week, at least for the general manager position, and then maybe we can see some Sabres connections start to come up, or maybe we don't, and they are good with Eric Stahl. They let this play out, and they make a move later in the summer. I don't know, but let's kind of step back. Let's kind of step back into the now and into where the options still lie for them. Really, it's everything is still out there as a viable option that we talked about, a few weeks ago. One interesting thing for me is, as I just mentioned, with the Islanders job, is it seemed like Marc Bergevin was going to be getting that job. Now, if you're kind of watching this horse race unfold and you're seeing what some of the well-connected people that cover the Islanders are saying, it appears now that Matthew Darsh from the Tampa Bay Lightning has jumped and maybe into the lead in that one. So then that brings Bergevin back into the conversation for the Sabres. And there's nothing for me to go off of any information or anything. But it always just felt for me when Ken Holland went to the Kings that Bergevin was kind of maybe the guy that the Sabres would go to of credibility, former general manager in this league, connections, experience, all of those things. So all pointed to Bergevin. And now that if it does go the way that it seems to be going, that he will not get the job with the Islanders, then I think he's another interesting name that comes back into the mix of what the Sabres could do with him, being back in that conversation. So, Bergevin. Rick Dudley is still the name I think a lot of fans point to, and maybe rightfully so with the connections to the Sabres. still lives in the area, uh, plenty of front office experience. Is essentially already in a senior advisor role with the Florida Panthers. Does he, I don't know what his contract situation is there, but does he jump from Florida to Buffalo? Would he want to do that? Um, the Panthers are a good team and he's got a good thing going there with them. Uh, Maybe he doesn't want to jump to a situation like it is in Buffalo, or maybe he does. Maybe he wants to take some pride in turning this team around, or what organization or franchise that he was involved in, um, for portions of his front office career and uh, even playing career. So Dudley is, maybe if you're putting odds on here, I mean, I guess he would maybe be your favorite. It doesn't mean that he will get it, but I would say if I'm putting odds on based on just pure connections and logic and all of that, Dudley is probably your odds-on favorite of the well-known names. And then you kind of get into some other ones. I've thrown a few out like Rob Blake. He's out there in the open market right now without a job. Lawrence Gilman's another one I've thrown out, former Toronto Maple Leaf executive, Vancouver Canucks, Coyotes organization, a lot of experience. I've talked about him a few times, and I think I've told this before, but when I wrote about him and a couple other options in December when the Sabres were really going through it in a losing streak, I reached out to, I think it was about 8 people around the league to kind of just pick brains and ideas, and respected front office people who at the time I thought could come in and start to turn those organization around and give them credibility. And I believe 6 of the 8 people mentioned Gilman to me as somebody that could be a fit. So, he's a guy with the cap experience. He's handled the AHL. Really, he's touched almost every single area of a front office besides being a general manager himself. And I think that's kind of an overseer, advisor, connections with teams, with agents, with players that could really be a good fit for them. Now, I would say it's unlikely that they would go that route, because that could have been done by now unless they're waiting for somebody else able to circle back to him. But I have no reason to believe that to be the case. So he's another outside option. Of course, Kekalainen still doesn't have a job. You can consider him in there. Brendan Shanahan officially was announced that he was no longer going to be staying with the Maple Leafs as their president. That was announced today. I think that would be a really nice get for them, but I don't think he's coming for an advisor role. I think he would have to come here as a president of hockey operations, run your entire front office, and basically be the new guy. And I don't think that would be a bad thing by any means, but I just don't think the Sabres are in a position of looking to do that right now. But really, I mean, it's, if you're looking for the credibility, the connections, even some connections Shanahan has with the front office people that are already here, from previous places, and just familiarity, and even trying to get some of the front office people, particularly analytics department, to come work for the Maple Leafs. It seems like it would be a good fit and a good match, but all signs there point to him most likely going to Islanders to run their front office. So it's not really a fun or significant conversation to have there on Shanahan, or really to get too deep into, because it's not realistic. But on that, the Shanahan part of it, and I think just overall, I was thinking about it today. Just think about the names that are out there. Shanahan, Blake, Bergevin, Kekalainen. I don't know if Matthew Darch would ever take your call for how much, what he's really looking for in the experience there. But there's a couple other guys that I think would maybe be interested in being a general manager or running a front office if this was a situation where teams were given, or front office executives were given the opportunity to come in and run this without answering to somebody else. And I think that, I guess where I'm trying to go with this is, I wonder if this is a missed opportunity by bringing Adams back in this particular offseason are not moving him out of the role into a different role and then hiring somebody else to run this team. I mean, every year there's going to be, there will be names out there for sure. But I just feel like this year there's a lot of those big ones with experience. I mean, if I mentioned Ken Holland, who went to Los Angeles, is another one you can mix into it. I don't know. I mean, like I said, it's hard to say that because every year there's going to be names, right, that you could go to or good options or good ideas. But really, it just feels like this team needs, and I've said it numerous times, needs someone with credibility, needs somebody with experience for not only running this team and to just make it look like a real franchise and organization, but I think even just for conversations around the league, you need that person in place. And we're kind of seeing it here as it's unfolding and we're rolling. We're getting near the end of May and they still don't have somebody in place. Is trying to find this advisor, maybe it's not as easy as they thought it was going to be. And really, again, it could be just as simple as they're waiting for somebody to be done, be it Dudley, and he's going to step right in. Very possible that's what's happening. But until that's done, we're going to sit here and we're just going to kind of think and speculate through this. And for me, it really gets down to if you accept and you believe, as you should, that this is the last kick at the can for this front office. This is a 1-year thing to get it right, to be a playoff team, to save jobs, and to keep this project moving forward. If that is what you believe, and I think we all should believe that, my concern is as we're crossing days off the calendar, I'm becoming less and less believable is maybe the word, or will accept that if they were to hire this new advisor, that they could make a significant impact this offseason. Now, let me tell you why. One reason is this person, whoever it may be, has already missed their amateur scouting meetings that took place last week. They missed other planning meetings that took place last week in Buffalo, as we saw with the entire front office that was in town for those meetings last week, with them making appearances at the Amerks game. So that part of it is missed. Not a big deal. Okay, fine. What is a big deal to me is we are essentially a week and a half away from the NHL scouting combine. Now, in most years, it's not that big of a deal. You have your player interviews, you have some conversations with agents. But this year is different. And the reason this year is different is because the draft is decentralized. So if you don't remember, this year when the draft is in, I believe, Los Angeles, none of the front offices will be in Los Angeles. Everybody will be, remote, if you will. That makes the most sense. Back at their facilities. So that eliminates everybody in the front offices getting together in one spot for a week to finalize trades. They have final conversations with agents, with prospects. That's not going to happen this year. So we heard Friedman mention it. If you listen to 32 Thoughts podcast, this combine is going to be more significant because a lot of those conversations are going to take place during that week in Buffalo between teams, between agents, between prospects. And I think not having this advisor in place to be a part of that is going to set them back and really hamper any true ability for this person to come in and make a significant impact in this offseason. It doesn't mean that they won't at all, but I think it at least lessens, perhaps significantly, the impact that they can make. Because you want that person in place for those conversations. You want them to talk to agents about free agents. You want them to talk, with prospects. You want them to talk with agents about their own players. That is the entire point, is to have this veteran person in with experience, with connections, to help you with those conversations. And that doesn't mean that the only time those conversations are going to happen is during that 1 week at the combine, but that's when a lot of things will happen. That's when a lot of balls get rolling. That's when a lot of, I don't want to say finalize, but get pretty far on certain things. And if this person comes in, when you have your plans in place and you're 2.5 weeks away from the draft and free agency, like if you're trying to adjust and audible, I mean, again, it sets you up for mistakes. It sets you up for misses, for disagreements, for hesitation, and you miss things. In a time where things happen quickly and rapidly, um, it's setting themselves up to make it more difficult than it needs to be for a front office that already has enough challenges themselves. So really, that for me, I think is the biggest issue. It's not so much that I don't believe that they're going to hire somebody. It's not so much that I don't believe that this is all like a fake thing, that they're just kind of appeasing the fans. I think legitimately they are going to hire somebody at some point for that position. It's just for me, it comes down to the longer this goes on without that person in place, it becomes on the surface, or what it looks like, something that was just done to appease. But this person really, during the off season, has no significant impact on what goes on in the moves that they make. And you could say, well, at least they'd be here for the regular season, but we just played that game. We saw how difficult and how, I don't say rare, but how little moves are made in season until the deadline. And it's I'm not going to keep going on. I want to the things I want to get to for sure, but that's my concern. It's not so much that they won't do something; it's that the time is ticking here on this guy or girl being able to come in and make an impact this summer for this team. Okay, let's get off of the front office. Let's move our way to the coaches, because that is another interesting conversation to have. So I had a few tweets on it today. So let's get all on the same page and clarify exactly what's going on there from what I understand. So as I mentioned, the amateur scouting meetings and planning meetings took place last week in Buffalo. And the significance of that is the assistant coaches were in town for that. They were around, is the way it was described to me. As for the meetings themselves that took place, only Seth Appert and Lindy Ruff were the two coaching staff members that were in those meetings and in those discussions. So the other members of the coaching staff were not. So that tells us one of two things. I'm sure we know. Obviously, Seth Appert's going to be sticking around. And, there's those assistant coaches, for what it's worth, weren't significantly part of conversations of planning towards next season. Further to that, my understanding from what I was told today is there's still no decisions made. It's still up in the air. They're reviewing their options on what they're going to do with the coaching staff. The difference here to the front office thing is you can wait a little bit longer into the off season, even into the end of July and or into August, to really make those decisions and bring your staff together. I would say no later than the end of July, early August. But I still don't think it'll go that long. What is happening here, though, is by waiting, again, unless they have specific people in mind, but by waiting, Chicago Blackhawks made their coaching hire with Jeff Blashill. Michael Pekka, a name that a lot of people thought could be somebody that the Sabres would target if he ends up leaving the New York Rangers, which he did, but he went to join Blashill on the Blackhawks. Okay, so he's out of it now. Now when teams start to get close on hiring their head coaches, like in Boston, for example, and a couple other spots, can't think of the top of my head, assistant coaches are going to start to come off the board, and that's going to limit your options of what you can do. There's still a wide range of people that they can consider bringing in. Somebody that I quote tweeted today from Frank Saravelli's post is Kevin Dean from the Chicago Blackhawks. He was not retained on that staff under Blashill, and he is a well-respected coach in this league for a long time, and he is a solid defensive coach. And if you were looking for a defensive coach to come in with experience, he could be somebody that you look at. I thought about Derek Lalonde today. He has a little bit of U.S. national team experience, and we know how much the Sabres love their U.S. national development programs or U.S. national coaches. Again, on the defensive side, I wonder if a veteran coach that you could bring in um, after being let go from Detroit, he might not be that expensive. So that was somebody I thought about today. I thought about Vinny Prospel too, if they're going to promote, because really it's funny and sad. I'll tell you what I did today. I was going through coaching ideas in my head, and the obvious thing is to look at connections the head coach has had in the past, because obviously they will be on the head coach's staff. Well, in my head, I'm like, well, you know, a lot of the things the Sabres have done recently, there's more connections to South Africa. You think of the new strength coach, Josh Norris, other in-season moves they've made. Seth Epard brought his video people last year from the Amerks up to the NHL. So then I'm like, okay, maybe I should go look for South Africa connections. So here I spent an hour going through U.S. National Development Program assistant coaches he had. Nothing really that interesting or intriguing. But then I got to Prospel of, NHL experience. He was a head coach in the Czech League. He's done a really good job the last 2 years in the AHL with the Amerks, familiar with Appert. Would they want to bring him up, or do they think he fits better as a development coach? Because really, a lot of those players in the AHL have a heavy respect for Prospel and really like to, play under him. So I don't know if they'd be that intrigued by that or really want to do that. Maybe his best fit is in the NHL. But then there was another person that I stumbled upon, and that's what kind of got me. Well, if they bump Prospel up, I don't know if this guy is ready to step into the NHL. But then let's say they bump Prospel up. Then I thought about Kevin Porter. So Porter currently is an assistant coach on the U.S. National Development U17 program. He was an assistant coach for Wilkes-Barre Scranton for a couple of years. He had stints on the Amerks from 2017 to 2020, where he was their captain, and also from 2012 2014. And he had stints around the Penguins, so we have some Pittsburgh front office guys, so there's some more connection. Again, I don't think that Porter is somebody who can go from coaching the U17s at the U.S. National Development Program into an NHL bench. But if they did promote somebody down from the AHL into the NHL, then I wonder if Kevin Porter made sense to make that jump into the AHL onto Michael Leone's staff. I'm throwing darts at the wall, trying to put pieces together, just trying to think of fun ideas. So yeah, that was one connection. I don't know. I mean, I have no reason to believe they talk to any of these people or have any interest in any of these people. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. They could just very likely just keep the same staff and keep rolling. Nothing would shock me at this point. And it feels like that the coaching staff is a back burner issue for them. The more focus is on the front office, the roster, and then they'll get eventually handling the coaching staff. Fine, whatever is what it is. But that's my thoughts on the coaching staff. So now we're going to jump to the team itself. Where I want to start things is the Bo Byram rumors that have come out. So from, again, Elliot Friedman, 32 Thoughts Podcast, mentioning that the Sabres have Byram out there and that they've, going into the whole thing about what he's looking for more more of an opportunity to play a more prominent role. God bless him. But if he has the confidence and thinks that he can do that, go for it, man. Like, chase it. Fine, great. It's not going to be here, obviously, and I think that makes sense to why he would be open to another opportunity where he would get power play time or he would get that top pair minutes. So I think overall, and I think the Sabres themselves probably, if you're reading things properly and from little information that has made its way to me, I think they would be comfortable moving on from him because the market out there, I think there is some good interest in him. And, you know, I think, I believe that they've had some escalated talks already. I don't think anything's imminent by any means, so don't get my words twisted there. But I think they've gone deeper than just initial conversations on it with a few teams, and we'll see where that shakes out and where that goes. Ultimately, my expectation at this point, based on everything, all the smoke around it, is that he will be moved and they'll use him to bring in something else, whether it be a defenseman or a forward that they think will improve their teams in more of a fit of what they're looking for, especially in the blue line, if that's what they do, for Rasmus Dahlin and for Owen Power. So that's the Byram piece of it. The other thing I wanted to touch on that is interesting, with these meetings that happened last week, try to get a little bit more clarity and a little bit more understanding of where they're going and what their ideas are, for what information that I can squeeze out of anywhere. But one thing I wanted to bring up that I thought was interesting that I've been told, from multiple people now, and it's probably because of some of the stuff that I said last week on the podcast with Anthony, that Matthias Samuelsson. So I'll be straightforward. I still think that they have a desire to move him, and to see what his market is and use that cap space for something else. What I was told, though, is essentially maybe I was getting a little bit ahead of myself, is the best way to put it. I don't think it's as concrete as maybe I thought it was. So essentially, I was told to maybe rein that back in a little bit, that it's not as certain as perhaps I was making it out to being from what I was initially told. And now, again, that can be, a few things. It could just be trying to gauge the market, control, that sort of thing. It could be, they've had internal conversations and maybe they've had a change in their mind, or maybe that understand there's certain players that they can't get and maybe they do want him to stay. And, those conversations are all ongoing. So wanted to correct myself because last year I got burned with the Yoki Haru thing. And I think that was primarily the coaching change. But yeah, so pouring a little bit of cold water on the Samuelsson thing. I still think he's going to be moved eventually, but maybe not as certain as I thought on that one. So is what it is there. We'll see how that all plays out. As for the rest of the roster, it's been pretty quiet on Peterka, and I'm still of the belief that he'll be back next season. And, there's really not a lot more interesting beyond that. I think that obviously Byram and Peterka are two interesting guys in terms of players that are still on the roster. What they're going to do or what their contracts would be if they were to be re-signed, those are your two main focal points of, interesting moves that they could do. Ryan McLeod's a significant restricted free agent for them. I don't think he's in the same boat of potentially to be moved because I don't believe that's a thing that they want to do. Obviously, they really like him and they want to keep him and sign him. So that's what they'll go and do. It's really thinking about a lot of the offseason stuff that I've written over the last week or so, free agents, trade stuff. I've gone back again to thinking about the center spot. And look, I talked about it during last season, and don't get me wrong, I have faith and belief that Yuri Kulik could be a top 6 center for this team. He did it over, still a small sample, but not like 10 games. It was closer to 30. Held his own, looked good, and then now in the AHL playoffs, we're going to get to the Amerks in a minute here. He's looked good down there as well, trying to help them, advance further in the Calder Cup playoffs. So those are all good things, and he continues to build. But I think that there's a lot of risk in that spot. McLeod is a third line center, and that's what he is. At times he stepped up and played a second line center for them last year during injury. But really, you want to lock him into that third line center spot. The concern for me is, Thompson likely is going to stay on the wing, is Kulik and Norris, and it's different concerns. Kulik is, when you think about it, even as much faith you have, here's the way that I will put it, and I put it on the podcast we did last week. Any team that has a 21-year-old as their first line center, a 20-year-old in Zach Benson as their line one left winger, should not be taken seriously as a team that is pushing to be a playoff team, do or die scenario. Now, taking a step back from that, we know what Zach Benson can be. We know what his potential is, and he's only 20 years old, but I think his game is beyond a player of that age, at least defensively. So you can explain that part away, but then it's putting a lot of pressure on a 21-year-old to be a top six center and not falter for you. To not do it for 30 games, to do it for 80 games. And it would be okay if you had the drop behind them of more, what's what I'm looking for, more significant or more credible options. And you can always move Tage back to center, and I guess you could be okay. But I still think Kulik best fits in this league as a centerman from what I saw last season. So I think moving him to the wing would be, maybe you're not getting the same type of player. But Norris is the concern, because it's not so much that I don't believe in the player and what that player can be, because I do, but it's the 800-pound elephant in the room of a guy who just doesn't stay healthy. If you're only going to get 40 to 50 games out of him, let's say, who's going to play second line center for the other 30? Are you going to go Kulik and then Tage, I guess? You could do that, but again, then it weakens your strength on the wing if you have to move Tage off of wing and into center. And so then I get into thinking, well, maybe initially Marco Rossi, let's say for Minnesota, doesn't make sense, but does he though now, if you think about it? Because he could come here, play center, McLeod go to wing, or Rossi can go play wing. And then you have that built-in depth in case Norris can't stay healthy, or in case Kulik isn't up to it. You have that. But I don't know if they are thinking that, is my thing. We could sit here and have these conversations and logically think that A, B, and C make sense and they should do that. I think they believe in their centers. I think ultimately they believe in their forwards, and they're really not going to make a lot of significant changes. At forward, the focus is going to be more on the defensive side of things. But that's just something, that's creeped into my mind more and more as I've thought about it, looked at players, considerations. Like John Tavares was another guy from a free agent aspect. I was looking at Marner. Would he make sense on a one-year contract? Again, to be that depth, to be that he really can't go play the wing. You'd have to push somebody else to the wing. Again, that could be McLeod, but it's that sheltering, if you will. It's having something else there. Your break glass in case of emergency option that isn't horrendous. That is a realistic, respectable option in case other things do fall through for you. So I don't know. I'm sure more will come into my head as I go here. It's only May 22nd. We're not even at Memorial Day yet. There's still plenty of weeks here to chip things away as I do more of digging and looking into players and ideas. More stuff like this will pop in my head. But right now, the center aspect of this team is really something that's been a focus, at least for me in my head, the last week or so. All right, let's end things here on the Amerks. So the Amerks have game 4 tomorrow in Laval. 7:00 start. They are down 2-1 in the series. And if you didn't know, this is the best of 5. So tomorrow is an elimination game for the Amerks. They need to win or they will be out. A much more difficult matchup, I would say, than the first round against Syracuse. Laval is one of the better teams, if not the best team in the East, perhaps. I don't remember exactly. Um, so it's a difficult matchup. They're a good team. They're fast. They're physical. They're structured, good defensively. I think the Amerks got a good taste of that. Yesterday when the Carolina Hurricanes that game, and it's not because they wanted to. I think it's just because Laval really collapsed everything in the middle of the ice, forced them to take outside shots. And then when they did get into the middle of the ice, they just couldn't be primo and keep themselves into that game. So you know they controlled play. I thought at 5-on-5. I think that they haven't been outplayed significantly, except maybe game one. Um, I think they were heavily outplayed, but they weren't in game two, and I thought they were the better team at 5-on-5 in game three. So, I think there's hope and there's some faith that you can push to a game five here, and then you never know what happens in that scenario. As I mentioned, I played Kulik. I think he's played pretty well down there. I think Ryan Johnson has been the best defenseman. The defense for the Amerks, I think, has been a little bit of a concern. Even like Metza, who's usually pretty reliable, I think has struggled in this series with his exits and decision making. But I've liked Brian Johnson. I thought Constant Hellenius had a really nice game three. He's popped a little bit. That's good to see. Oslin and Murray, I want to see more from them. Oslin's had his moments where he kind of jumps here and there, but I think I want to see him get more involved offensively, get more to the middle of the ice, try to create more. He is trying to get pucks to the middle of the ice still, but again, with how much Laval is collapsing down, it's ending up in turnovers more than it's ending up on the stick of his teammates. So, that's not really working, allowing him to be effective in that regard. And I think Murray, as a veteran, just needs, big body veteran, needs to be more of an impact player than he's been. So, we'll see where that, and then, that gets us to Devin Levi. It's tough here for me because he had a really good round one, but round two, or I guess it's the Amerks round one, but it was round two of the playoffs. This is round three because the Amerks didn't play in round one. But what here or there, in the second playoff series that he's played in, I just don't think he's been solid in any game. It's going to be. It's difficult because, again, you had the good first series, you had the good season, so you don't want to shove all that to the side like it means nothing. But in this world, postseason play is scrutinized differently. It's bigger pressure against better teams, and you're expected to perform well in those roles, and he hasn't. An 835 save percentage in this series is not good enough. He's a 915 for the entire playoffs, which I think I said yesterday was 17th out of 20 goaltenders. It's you need him to be better in game four and game five. You just need it. The Amerks cannot score 4 to 5 goals against Laval over the next two games. You're not going to win both those games. It's difficult to do that. They are a good defensive team. So I'm really hoping Levi bounces back in game four and has a good game five for them to give you just reassurance that he can be somebody who's ready to step in next year because, there was that long layoff for the Amerks and that I'm sure didn't help. But we're into game three now. You should be back in it. And I think game three was maybe his worst of any of the games that he's played, in this series. So, I'm not gonna kill him, and say that he's not he's a boss and he's whatever, all that nonsense. Like, no, I'm not gonna go there. But if it goes poorly again in game four and you just have a really bad series here, then the questions are going to come up. Are we sure he's ready? Because really, like this, I've said it. It's probably what they're going to do. It's going to be Lukin and Levi, but it's a gamble. And for my own sanity, I guess what I'm looking for is just some confirmation that you can do it. Going up against one of the better, more veteran teams in the AHL and getting roasted is not going to make me feel that warm and fuzzy inside. And to be fair, his defense around him hasn't been great. There's been a lot of turnovers, and they're not putting him in the best spot. But there's been some goals that are not good. There's been some rebound control that is pretty poor. This right after the Amerks tied it in Game 3 and got the momentum and got back in that game in the third period. The second goal he gave up was really bad, short side, over the shoulder. Just can't go in that situation. Really took the wind out of the sails. Of all, I think, ended up scoring 3 goals over the next 5 minutes, and that was really it. That game ended in about 6 minutes in the third period. So I'm hoping for a bounce back from Levi. I'm hoping for a bounce back from, like I said, Oslin, Murray, even Wahlberg. I want to see more out of him too. Some of those key prospects who make more of an impact. Even Isaac Rosen, I think. I don't know how much longer he has left in this organization, but he's a player that I think should be performing at the level that Kulik is, and he's just not impacting the game enough. So we'll see. Game 4 tomorrow, and then of course, while I'm here, and I see Eddie's in the comment section, big Game 3, all deciding championship game, Game 3 for the Bandits on Saturday at 4:30. Winner take all Game 3. Can the Amerks pull off the three? I'm sorry. Can the Bandits pull off the three-peat? Or will the Rush play spoiler and win the championship in Banditland? That'll be fun. We'll see how that plays out. So Game 4 for the Amerks on Friday. Game 3 and win or go home. Game 3 for the Bandits on Saturday. All right. I think that's it for me tonight. I appreciate everybody listening. Everybody have a good Memorial Day weekend and be safe out there. For you locals, the weather doesn't look like it's going to be the best, but we'll make the most out of it that we can. Get some relaxation, get some time outside where you can. And then, we'll get back into it next week. So thanks for listening. Talk to you later.